housekeeping things before we really get underway here. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Lori Hers. I'm the Director of Open Enrollment and Custom Education here at Brown School of Professional Studies. And I'm very excited to be here with my colleague and our esteemed Professor Ed Barrows, who you would see here to my left, perhaps to your right. And we are here to bring you a masterclass on increasing influence and persuasion. And this is a really incredible skill set to have as a leader. And I'll let Ed tell you a heck of a lot more about that. But before we get into that, I did want to do a couple of housekeeping things. And I also want to say a few words about the Brown School of Professional Studies for those of you who may not have joined us before. So down at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a bunch of different apps, I guess, or buttons. And the one I want you to pay attention to mostly is the Q&A app. And that's something that enables you to put questions in throughout our webinar today. And I will be tracking those to see what questions you have. And we have about an hour together today. So Ed is going to share his content for most of that time, but we will devote 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions and create some answers to those. So please feel free to put them in the Q&A at any time. Also, the chat is available for you to use. It's still there on the bottom to the left of the Q&A. And feel free to post anything in chat along the way. And you know, we will pay attention to that as well. Although we won't be addressing questions from chat, we'll be addressing questions from the Q&A option. So please use that for questions. Okay. So what I'd like to do first is do a slight introduction to our School of Professional Studies. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so as I mentioned, today our masterclass is on increasing persuasion and influence. And, you know, this is a really incredible topic and one of a number of topics that our Professor Ed Barrows has been sharing with our audience over the course of this year, monthly. We've done our lessons in leadership masterclasses for most of this year. We have one more that's happening next month, and you're certainly going to get a promotion about that, and we can talk about that a bit more at the end. But just wanted to let you know that this is an ongoing effort that we're making to connect you to the really good information that our professors of the practice here at our School of Professional Studies are able to share with you. So a little bit about the School of Professional Studies. You may have noticed that we do have a 10-year anniversary kind of logo here. And that's because we are now officially here for 10 years. Our school was created back in 2014 with the mission to really draw on the commitment of academic excellence and intellectual freedom and diversity, equity, and inclusion to deliver programs that empower learners at all stages of their career. We really design programs and harness the academic excellence throughout the university, and we're able to pull from that to create programs that really help you to transform yourself, your workplaces, and your community. And we really are excited to be able to share a bit of content with you around professional development. So here's a spattering of some of the programs that we do in terms of master's programs. So those are for degrees and for credit. We also do custom programs and not credit programs. So in terms of the master's programs, we have about 30, and we're building those even still, that are geared towards professionals who are in their early years of their career, 0 to 5 years. And then we also have 3 professional master's programs for mid-career executives and leaders that are geared towards our executive MBA, our master's in healthcare leadership, and our master's in technology leadership. And these are 3 areas that Brown has deep expertise in to offer. We also design custom programs for organizations, and these can be done in an online format so that people would meet, say, once a week online, and we would do a live synchronous format for you and deliver a program that way, or they can be done in person either at our location at the Brown School of Professional Studies or at your location. And those programs are co-designed with input from organization representatives. And then we also have a whole portfolio that's growing on a regular basis of short courses, certificates, and tailored programs that are targeting professionals who want to upskill. And there's many, many different types of programs that we offer. There are short courses, there are certificate programs, and they span anywhere from a week long to 6 months long. And some of the topics that might excite you are some of our offerings now, which is AI ethics and governance. We have an inclusive leadership program. We have programs on coaching and programs on mindfulness, just to name a few. But we do invite you always to go to our website, and I will put that in the chat so that you all have that handy. But we do invite you to go to our website and find all the information that you need on any of the programs that interest you. And there's always an option to have an advisor talk with you or to attend an information session on any of the programs that we're going to be offering. So now to turn our attention a little bit to the topic that Professor Ed is going to share with us shortly, and think about influence and persuasion as a leader. And this topic really is crucial for you as a leader. It's something that can help you drive change. It can help you inspire and motivate people. It can help you to foster collaboration and team, culture, and it can help you to effectively communicate your vision, and all with an eye towards getting other people to do something you want them to do. And those words are taken directly from a book that Ed wrote with his colleague Laura Downing. You can see the reference on my slide here. It's called 12 Skills, and it's a wonderful guide that I would highly recommend. And now to Ed, our professor in practice. So Ed has broad and deep experience in many different areas of work and life. He started his career in serving in the Marine Corps, both as an active and reserve duty officer. He has lots of academic experience at Harvard, Boston College, Babson College, where he was always in a teaching role around leadership. He also was the managing director at Duke Corporate Education, and he designed and delivered programs there for global clients. And he worked as a professional consultant and so on with many different big companies, including Deloitte, General Electric, PwC, and Palladium Group. And he has deep experience in education as well as in leadership. And he's a certified coach. So really has a broad swath of experience to offer. Ed joined us at the School of Professional Studies about 1.5 years ago, and he's been extremely busy, which you might understand. So with that, I want to turn things over to Ed, who's going to talk in much greater detail about our topic of the day, increasing persuasion and influence.
Lori, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Hey, great to see everybody. I noticed, and thanks for putting this in the Q&A, that the chat's not enabled. So I asked my colleagues to see if we could do that and have you have the ability to chat throughout. So whether or not we're able to do that, we'll know here in a few minutes, but let's spend some time this afternoon, this evening, or in the morning, wherever you're calling in from, to talk, as Lori mentioned, about increasing influence and persuasion. It's actually an important skill. That's why it's in the 12 Skills book. And what we'll do today is just give you a quick welcome, and Lori's done a fantastic job setting us up for that. We'll also spend some time talking about the lessons in leadership generally, very quickly. A lot of good information that we have and we share broadly at the School of Professional Studies. Been at it for 10 years, so we have a whole repository of information. We'll do a quick refresher on the 12 skills, and I do mean quick, and then we'll get into the bulk of today's discussion, which is really around helping you increase influence and persuasion. I'll give you some action steps after that. So I know I've talked about this for those of you who have seen this before, but Brown has at the School of Professional Studies a really strong depth in healthcare, in IT, in leadership in general. We have our Brown IE MBA program, but we have all kinds of certificates. And someone put in the chat, ask about how to get into these professional development programs. You just need to sign up. They're not degree granting by and large, but all kinds of information that's available on our website and tools you can use. So there's 12 skills. Laura Downing, who's on the call with me, and I put this together in 2023 and really said, what are the key skills leaders need to advance in their career, especially emerging leaders? And we've, over the last, I guess we're in month 10, this is our 10th topic of the 12, influence and persuasion. You see where they fall on the dartboard. And we have a couple left in terms of executing well and then high performance culture, but it all really stems around having a good self-assessment, which you can take on the side as well. So there's resources available for you. If you do want to go to 12skills.com, they're all free. Feel free to download that stuff. There's a workbook, there's assessments, there's all kinds of things you can use if you're interested in developing yourself or your team further. But let's get on to the topic for today, influence and persuasion. And Laura and I have actually developed a class that we teach on this. And we have a whole raft of information we've been doing for a while. Although, to be fair, none of this is original thinking from us. I mean, the case studies and the practices are, but not the texts themselves. So what's important to understand, and we looked at this backdrop through the lens of this backdrop over the last several sessions, we see a lot of change happening in the world. So why is influence and persuasion important? Well, as we see markets changing, there's a lot of different interpretations of what the future may hold. And very few people, if any, know what that looks like. So we use influence to help shape other people's views on what the future might hold and really try to coalesce around some shared perspective. Additionally, we see technology changing. But the question then becomes, how do we determine inside our organization which technology we're going to adopt, how much of an investment we're going to make? Influence and persuasion plays a role in that. We have to communicate to our workforce, so we need to be persuasive. There's nothing worse than giving a discussion or attending a meeting or broadcasting, so to speak, to a large employee base, what we need to do to change our organization, but have it not be persuasive. So we want to really think about how to do that. With individuals that we work with, whether they be bosses, peers, people that work for us, or just colleagues that work around us, we have to be effective in helping them understand some of the merits of the cases that we're making, accept some of the things that are happening, and even move, you'll see in the definition of what our objectives are for today, move in the direction of taking specific action. And that is true of organizations as well. That's where we're going to start, is really in this area of politics. Organizations are complex entities. Bureaucracies, as they've grown up in the industrial era, are really challenging to navigate, and they haven't gotten any easier. So the chat has been enabled. So thanks, Jonathan. So I'll be looking forward to some of your responses here in a minute. So it's important to understand the starting point of what we're going to look at today, these three different steps. It is really, really important to start thinking about the political side of things. So what we want to help you do today is think about, what do politics look like for you and your organization? And that may be a topic that some of you really don't want to talk about, but it's becoming increasingly important, and it will be much more important the more senior you go in an organization. How do we help other people understand and take action with our ideas? How do we communicate persuasively? That's a topic that we're going to cover when we get into persuasion. And then how do we influence people to take action? That's what the principles of influence are. And I'll talk about how we got to those in a moment. But first, a quiz. We've done this every time, and it's in the book, and feel free to take it here. I'd love to see, as is customarily the case, how you rate yourself in these three areas of what we call persuasion and influence. So you've got these three question or content areas. Are you comfortable with politics, and you know how politicking works in your organization? 0 to 3, 3 being the highest score you can get for that. You know how to employ elements of persuasion effectively, whether you've been sort of schooled in it or not. And then you can influence people effectively to accomplish the things that you need to. So go ahead and put in the chat, since it's now enabled, what your score is on a scale from 0 to 9. I've never seen a 0 so far in any of these responses, but I'd love to see how people are doing. So we've got a pretty wide range here, and that's good. And that's why you're here. Hopefully, I've seen 4s, 5s, 3s. I saw a 1. If you're someone that is feeling like, wow, I'm not really great at this stuff, that's okay. The good thing is, as you know from the title of the book, their skill. So we have a really wide range of responses, the widest I think I've ever seen in terms of our 0 to 9 or 12 scale. So I appreciate everyone putting that in here. And I ask you, and I gave a presentation yesterday on executive presence to an organization, to one of their large customer-facing units. And I asked people, it was, again, a 3-question assessment like this one. I said, of the areas that you rated, the first one is politics, the second one is persuasion, and the third one is influence. Which of those is the area that you really need to work on? My guess for a lot of people is it might be politics. I'm not sure, but again, feel free to put it in the chat. What are the things? The webinar is being recorded. I think, Tracy, you're asking, so that will be available to you after the fact. So think about what's the area that I really need to work on. I see influence. I see Rebecca saying politics, influence. So you pick the thing that you need to work on. And as we go through, we'll talk about it and you can give some context and some thought to it. So I do see a lot of politics, although a lot of influence coming through. So what is this influence and persuasion? You got to always start off with some type of definition. You see what I put over on the left-hand side. It's got a lot of different skills embedded in it. It's listening. It's trying to accommodate people's points of views. It's guiding and shaping all of them. Thanks for your honesty, Anna. It's also got to do with sense making. Understanding will really start there, what happens inside organizations. Persuasion is really the process of making a convincing argument, whether you do it verbally or in written form or through a slide presentation, and you're trying to get people to adopt a point of view. In addition, we think about persuasion differently than influence, where persuasion is often a set of techniques that you use in argument. And you'll see here shortly that these are not new by any stretch of the imagination, but influence is a little different. It's a set of really discovered social psychological principles that help motivate people to action and almost in some cases impel people to action. Now, our point of view is good leaders, really the strongest leaders, understand how important being persuasive is and being influential is in an organization, because that's how you get things done. We don't work and live in a world where I have a team of people that works directly for me all the time. If at all, we have to influence through people. We have to work on cross-functional teams where we need people from different parts of the organization to accomplish projects we're on. We need to influence people outside the organization to do and accomplish things, whether they're clients or customers, or we've got partners in different channels. It's essential that we understand, regardless of what our role is, and really this pertains to everybody, even individual contributors, how to get things done through the lens of persuasion and influence. So let's talk about that. And I really appreciate everyone jumping in the chat. Love to see that as we go. And I appreciate everyone's candor. So let's think for a minute. We'll do a thought exercise. Think of somebody you've worked with and thought, man, that person is really quite influential. She is able to get people to motivate them toward action and take some, listen to what she says and take some type of action that's rooted in the things that she would like them to accomplish. When you think about that person, if you know someone like that, put in the chat one thing that they were really good at. They were a good listener. Thanks, Christopher. They were sort of storytelling. I just had a conversation with somebody about that this morning. There's a sense of relatability. Thanks, Jason. Like as a real person, I can understand where they're coming from, and keep these coming. That's personal, right? There's a personal aspect to it. Like vulnerability comes up. There's an authenticity. There's a likability. You'll see more about that. A sincerity, communication, confidence in their beliefs. We talk about that in executive presence, the ABCs. They take on work. They don't just dish it out to others. They're part of that process. Asking good questions. I love this point of Tracy you make and reinforce about relatability. So all of us have seen what I like to call we call a good exemplar. People who are good at influencing. But the benefit for us is we can unpack this a little bit. We can ask ourselves, well, what do they do? How did they get that way? And we can get better at this if we're willing to practice. But that's the challenge I'm giving you today, is you have to be willing to practice this. And in the courses that Laura and I have taught previously that were full semester courses, the entire course is based on practice. And this course essentially will be too. You have to do something in order to build the skill. You can read about it, and that's great for awareness, but that's not the same thing as practicing the skill. So we've got this 3P process here. It's politics, pillars, and principles. Pretty straightforward. So we're going to start off on the organizational side on politics. And that's really about understanding the landscape, the dynamics, the sources of, in some cases, power and influence inside the organization, some of which can be seen, but some of which isn't seen. And that's what makes politics so challenging. Then we're going to look at pillars of persuasion. These three essential elements, or almost legs of a stool, that enable us to make persuasive, compelling argument in trying to persuade somebody, whether that be verbally or in writing. And then principles, these we have 6 principles of influence. It's actually 7 now, but we talk about 6 in the book. And the idea is these are behaviors that you can engage in that will, again, help shape and motivate people to action. Now, how many of you out there, and be honest, have ever said this? I don't really do politics. Politics, not for me. That's something other people do. It's not something I do. Has anyone ever said that? You can go ahead and put that in the chat. I see some hands going up. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't do politics. One of the things some of us get pulled into it, Joel, like whether we like it or not. So let me make I would say, somewhat controversial statement. Now, I don't know your parents or the people that raised you, if you're raised by grandparents or aunts and uncles, whomever. But I would be willing to bet that along the way somewhere, you got advice similar to this. Listen, Joel, Tammy, whomever, Veronica, the way to get ahead in life is to just work hard and put your head down and you'll move ahead in life. How many people have ever gotten that advice? And I'm not missing out on the people that say politics is distasteful. How many people have ever got that advice? Yep, if you just work hard, do a good job, keep your nose clean or whatever sort of thing. Yeah. So all you people are saying, yes, I have some terrible news for you. It's not true. I know you want to believe it. It's called the just world hypothesis, that like at the end of the movies, the good guys win and, the bad guys lose and all that stuff. We've been acculturated to that, right? But the problem is it's just not true, unfortunately. And I wish it were on your behalf. And Laura and I both, we wish we could give you a hug and say it's going to be okay, that, fairness and equity always prevail. And we should always act. I'm not suggesting ever that we should act in a way that's inequitable, unfair. We should never do that. We can't give hugs, at least over the web, which we'll figure out how to do that. But the problem is it just isn't the case in organizations. So what we want to do is sensitize you of that to a little bit. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to jump in and start politicking per se. And one of the things that we say when we teach this is you can use it sort of offensively or defensively. And it's okay just to be defensive and say, I'm just trying to understand what's happening here. And that goes back to sense making, okay? So I would encourage you, if you're one of the people that put in the chat, one day you will be discovered. Yes, you keep holding on to that, Carrie. Hold on to that belief. Check back in a few years. One of the things that we encourage people to do is take a step back. When I teach classes, I always encourage my students to say, pick a day and imagine for several meetings, you're a researcher. Observe what's happening. You have to be able to put on your researcher or observer hat and see what's happening in your organization. Who tends to make the decisions? Who seems to have influence over other people? Who controls a lot of resources? The theory is called resource dependency. If you control a lot of money, or you control technology, or you control a lot of people or have cognizance over them, you tend to have a lot of power, and that oftentimes gives you a lot of influence in an organization. But I would encourage you to think about politics as not necessarily a bad thing. And in the book that we showed earlier from Kathleen Kennedy Reardon, she does a wonderful job talking about, being positive with politics, because there are people that are very good at politics, but are very positive too. And you can be like that. Be careful and cognizant of the things that you say. If you're always one that defers to other people in meetings, you might be giving them a little bit too much, I would say, authority. We'll talk about that later. But, always, think about, am I making a contribution? Am I creating a positioning for myself in the organization, as well as some awareness? Consider who you're sort of giving power to and alter it if it's not helping you. One of the things that, again, back to the people who say, oh, my great work will be discovered, one of the best ways to keep your boss and people around you informed about what you're doing is tell them. You don't have to brag about it, but say, here's the things I'm working on. Here's the things I've created. It's okay to take credit for your own ideas. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're always allowing other people on projects and the like to take the credit for it, and you're not getting your fair share, you might be someone that's disinclined to create your own space within the organization. Inadvertently, sometimes people have dysfunctional patterns. They take low visibility, low value projects. I'm not going to get involved in that. Other people cut them off in meetings, and they have a disinclination to say or do anything about it. But remember, I just go back to yesterday when I was giving this presentation on building a strong executive presence as part of becoming and signaling you're ready for a more senior role. It's really essential that you are able to communicate in a way and demonstrate that you have some gravitas in the organization. So if you haven't seen that webinar that we did, go back and watch or check it out in the book. But the idea is you don't want to have dysfunctional patterns, and you don't want to have a dysfunctional mindset that says, listen, other people do politics and it's fine if they get all the credit. Over the long run, that will not help you. That will not be beneficial to you in your organization. It's okay to take credit for the things you do. And don't be predictable. Don't be someone that always, so-and-so always behaves this way. She or he is always a people pleaser. Be mindful in organizations. Oftentimes, if you're not aware of it, people will take advantage of you. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't contribute. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be a team player. Of course you should be. But if you're always the person that has to do a certain task or is expected to do certain things, then that may impact the perception that people have of you in the organization. And it may actually sort of draw power away from you. So be really, really mindful. And I know there's a lot of good questions coming in here and a lot of great comments too. So feel free to follow along, and then as we go through, we'll talk more about it. But the most important thing you can do, and I think Laura put in the chat, you can watch an interview we had with Kathleen Kennedy Reardon. But the most important thing you do have to do is change your mindset about politics. It's not a dirty word necessarily. And to get more senior in an organization, you have to be able to navigate the political landscape. You have to be able to build alliances. You have to make investments, build equity, call in favors if you need them, work across the aisle, so to speak, to be somebody that is seen as an influencer. We'll get to that in a moment. So change your mindset about politics and really observe who has power, who has authority, how do they use that? How do certain people in organizations find a way to find out information, know what's happening in advance, and share that appropriately? So let's talk about persuasion. Now, the interesting bit about persuasion is the principles of persuasion. That's Aristotle there, if you didn't know who that was. They are not new. They're about 2,000 years old, maybe older. Comes out of this discipline of rhetoric. It's really about shaping how you come across when you communicate. In this presentation, it's organized a certain way, hopefully so that you can understand it, and it's consistent with all the other ways we've done it. It's consistent with how we wrote the book. So the idea is we're trying to come across in a structured, thoughtful, second point, logical way. But when we think about making a persuasive argument, whether it be verbally or in writing, even if it's an email, we want to think about these three, we call them pillars or legs of a stool. The first is ethos, the second is logos, and the third is pathos. And any good presentation should really tap into those things. The idea here is that you want to demonstrate your mental or moral qualities. If you've ever heard of being a virtuous person, or the cardinal of your virtues of the fortitude, there's sort of escaping me at this point in time. There's sort of courage. I'll have to go back and put them in the chat. But your character needs to come across in terms of your mental and moral qualities. We also want to think about logic, that there's a logic to what it is you're saying. You're making a sound argument, whether that's data or information or some type of structured thinking that's helping get your point across. And lastly, emotions or pathos, your connection to the audience. Let's talk about these three things in turn. So the first one, and we're in that second step here, is really around demonstrating your character or ethos. And there's two elements of that, and I'll go into something that we talked about previously. One is expertise, demonstrating your knowledge, skills, and abilities in the area where you work. It doesn't matter what you do, whether you're a lawyer, accountant, IT, salesperson, what have you. Demonstrating you're competent at your job and your role, and then building trust with people, that people can actually rely on the things that you're saying. So how do we do that? Well, this is actually going to come up again when we talk about your principles of influence. And I've talked about this previously, but it's worth revisiting if you haven't sat in on one of the previous webinars we have. The trust equation from the trusted advisor, Charlie Green and Andrea Howe, and some other authors, is really a helpful way to think about this. And I actually just gave a talk, excuse me, to some colleagues at Brown here about how to build trust, how to be more trustworthy with the people that we work with. And trust is an important part of being effective, even in the political dimensions of an organization. So being trustworthy has 4 variables to it. Trust or trustworthiness is a function of 3 variables in the numerator and 1 in the denominator. The first is credibility. Are you credible? Are you seen as someone who's an expert? Do you know what you're talking about when you talk about whatever it is in your particular area of expertise? Do you come across as credible? Are you reliable? If you give someone your commitment or your word to deliver something on time to a certain quality level, are you able to do it? Do you do it consistently? You know, you think about people in your organization that they always get things done on time, right? On budget, whatever the case is. But then there's also people you work with that maybe you can't count on them. So you have to sort of plan around them. It'll probably be late. They may need some extra time, things like that. You know, ask yourself, you know, am I reliable? Do I give off an image of being reliable? And then there's intimacy in the sense of knowing people on a personal level, having a relationship more than just kind of a passive surface-oriented relationship, that you actually get to know people at a deeper level. And then that's all divided by one's self-orientation, meaning the more you focus on other people and their needs and meeting their needs to a reasonable degree, the more trustworthy you will become and you will seem. People that are highly focused on themselves and their goals, we tend to view them as less trustworthy. So the idea here is the more consistent you can be in credibility, reliability, intimacy, and have a lower self-orientation, the higher your trustworthiness will be and how people will perceive you. So going back to this concept of ethos, you know, you want to demonstrate your character, and a good way to do that is build trust with your colleagues. Thinking a bit further, there's also this next pillar on logos, logic. So we oftentimes think, especially people that may have sort of data-rich or engineering-oriented backgrounds, nothing wrong with that, that the only thing you need to do to make a compelling case is have rock-solid data and information. That's not true. You have to also make sure that you're connecting with the audience in a way that makes sense. And you also have to help them understand that you, as someone, are capable of giving that and have the character ethic necessary to make that logical case. So of course you need to ground whatever you're doing in a good principle of data and argument, logical thinking. And leaders at all levels are being challenged, and they have to step up to give very thoughtful arguments based on relevant data and information. So no matter what you're doing, you're looking at a new product or a new market, you have to bring data and information to the table that helps you create a compelling case. And you're going to have to walk the audience through the rationale and the logic that builds that case. It's essential. So logic is not something separate. It's one of the 3 pillars of making a strong argument in addition to one's own character. Now, the last piece, some of us may tend to overlook. Really thinking about the audience, and this is what we call pathos. It's kind of the empathy or the emotional side. Many of us like to believe that we make our decisions based on logic and data. The evidence shows something rather different. We tend to be more emotionally driven. I literally got off a call to come to this call where it was a very senior person in an organization. He said, you know, I'm always really surprised, in some cases because he was very good at this, I'm always really, I feel great about the fact that people follow along with stories. If you can tell them a compelling story, they tend to be able to move to do something differently or change in an organization. You have to understand your audience and what your audience needs or wants to hear. And then the message that you put together has to hit on the points that are relevant to you or relevant to them. You have to connect with your audience. I'm sure some of you have heard that phraseology before. You need to connect with your audience. So audience members come to a situation with all kinds of different values, perspectives. They may not be able to buy in. They may not be interested in being there. Your job is to try to connect with them at some level and then help them understand and move them along this process or this pathway of really thinking and accepting the ideas based on who you are, your own capability and your credibility, and then also based on the logic of your message. But if you skip over this part, the emotional side or the connection side and the needs of your audience, it really increases the likelihood that your message is going to land flat. If you've ever been in a meeting where someone was talking about something, you're thinking, I'm not even sure this person is making sense relative to where we are in this process or what we need to hear at this point in time, you will have a sense of what it's like when someone is not meeting the needs of the audience. The message is oftentimes completely lost if it's heard at all. So we walk through the importance of politics, and I got you to at least think about maybe reframing and looking at your organization a little bit differently. We could spend an entire class on just politics, but I want you to also think about politics and then persuasion in terms of your argument. Now let's go to the last piece that I want to talk about is the principles of influence. Now, again, we did not create these, Laura and I. These are from a gentleman by the name of Robert Cialdini. He's a professor at Arizona State, if my memory serves me correctly. And he's got a book out called Influence, been out for a very long time. And he's got a second book out as well. And there's 7 principles. We're going to talk about 6 of them today. And these are really, really, really important. And they tend to be very effective. And Cialdini uncovered these. He didn't create them by actually going out and working with salespeople, working with people in customer service, working with people who are in positions where they were required often to influence and get other people to take action, back to our definition, right? So the idea here is there's these 6 principles that actually, by and large, work. Now, they don't work all the time, but they tend to be very powerful. So we always have to think about how to use these ethically, okay? We would never advocate in any way, shape, or form using these in an unethical manner, but we can not only be aware of people that do use them, because sometimes people try to influence us, and then also the impact of using them in a positive way. So let's talk about a few of these, and let's actually talk about all of them. So reciprocity. Most of us understand, and if you look across cultures, reciprocity is something that transcends genders, religions, cultures. It's really this notion that doing something for somebody else oftentimes creates an obligation. And you can create an obligation, or someone can create something for you. And there's lots of really interesting examples in the book very easily. Now, let's say, for instance, I'm throwing this out to the folks in the audience here. Let's say I invited you, I sent you a note after the webinar today, and I said, hey, I really loved your comments in the chat. I'd like you to come over to my house for dinner. And you accepted. What would you do before you came over to my house for dinner? I was going to make a nice dinner for you, and we're going to sit down and talk about stuff. What would you do? What would the most likely thing you would do as if you're coming to my house? Does anyone know? This shouldn't be a surprise. What can I bring? I'm going to bring a bottle of wine. What can I bring? A bottle of wine is right. So most people, a gift, yeah, definitely make it a nice gift. You would definitely need my address, but then if I didn't want you to come, I probably would give you a different address, but that's beside the point. You bring a dish, right? You bring something, right? You don't go empty-handed. Has anyone ever had an experience where at the holiday time, someone gave you a holiday gift and you didn't have a gift for them? How did you feel? Pretty terrible. You're like, oh, someone brought me a gift and I don't have a gift for you, right? You feel terrible. That's the concept of reciprocity. There's a sense that in all cultures and dimensions, if someone does something for you, you typically need to reciprocate. But the concept works in the workplace. One of the things that I find is if you do a favor for someone else, or you help them on a project or things like that, it engenders a sense of reciprocity, so that later on down the road, you might say, hey, Tim, you remember that night I stayed late for you? I'm really going to ask you, can you help me this weekend because I need to finish something? This notion, yeah, unity is, thanks, Laura. This notion of reciprocity, it works. And we've seen this in our class, really interesting. We had a student a few years ago in a class we were teaching. He knew it was his CEO's birthday. It was a middle-sized company. He didn't know the CEO well. He was a younger person, bought the CEO one of those Yenti mugs, you know what I mean? Put it on the CEO's desk with a card that says, happy birthday from so-and-so. The CEO called the person up to their office and then is having or had lunch with them every month. They set that up just based on giving that person the gift. So it created a sense of obligation. The way it was reciprocated was with meeting with a person every month for lunch. So even regardless of position, people oftentimes feel an obligation. So the second one is liking. We tend to want to work with people we like, unsurprisingly. And very rarely do we think about and ask ourselves, do people like me? Do people find that I'm positive? Do people like being around me? Do people like talking with me? And I was saying yesterday, and I use this terminology frequently, there's 2 kinds of leaders out there. There's leaders that light up a room when they walk into it, and there's leaders that light up a room when they leave it. And the question is, which kind of leader are you? Are you the kind of leader that when you walk into the room, people are like, oh, it's great to see you. I'm glad you're here. You're going to be a big help. Or are you the kind of person that when you leave the room, people's like, thank goodness that person is now gone. So you want to think about how do you enhance your likability at work? And I find this in my coaching too, even with senior leaders. I'll say, I had somebody talking to me recently and saying, I ask for people, they were in-house legal counsel at a company, said, I ask for people around me, I need them to do things for me. And they don't always get things done that I need for the work that I'm doing. The people didn't work for the person, they worked in different functions. And I said, okay. I said, how well do you know those people? Well, I only know them at work. So before you ask them for things, do you ever take time just to say, hey, how are you? Well, how was your weekend? The person said, well, not really. I don't really do much of that. I'm not, well, it might go a long way to spending some time asking people just, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? What's going on in your life? What are you working on? What are you watching on Netflix? Any of those things. It sounds corny. It's not intended to be trivial, and it's not intended to be manipulative. It's intended just to get to know people. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you go back to the trust equation, we talked about intimacy. That's part of likability, is having a relationship with people at work. Social proof is evidence, if you will, or some type of, you see the thumbs up, of, I'll say, input from other people that something is good or of a certain quality level. Most of us now, if you're going to buy something online, if you go to Amazon, you read the reviews. If you're interested in going to a restaurant, you actually look at, the number of ratings that it has. My wife specifically asks to see the food. I don't know why. She always wants to see pictures of the food. So I have to go find actual pictures of the food. I don't know if that's social proof, but that's what she likes to see. But otherwise, we tend to, in situations where we don't necessarily have a lot of knowledge, we tend to look for what the crowd says. Do people by and large think that this is a good restaurant? If they do, I'm probably more inclined to go there. Commitment and consistency. We tend to want to keep our word. How many of us, going back to the things that our parents have told us, we say, your word is your bond. You give someone a promise, you need to keep that. We are again brought up to believe that it's important to be consistent and keep our commitments. It demonstrates this coherence in our life so that my words and my commitments are consistent with my actions. And there's a great point, don't overcommit to things, or, as you've heard the old saying, don't overcommit and underdeliver. That's back to reliability and credibility. You don't want to be that kind of person in the workplace. So you want to make commitments carefully and be consistent on those commitments that you do make. Scarcity is one of the principles that underlies a lot of what you see when it comes to consumer goods, right? You've watched a TV show or you've listened to a radio ad that says, sign up now, memberships are limited, or supplies won't last. That's a technique to motivate people to action, because we tend not to want to miss out on something. But when something seems scarce, it gives us a sense of, we probably want to take action now because there might not be enough to go around later, and I could miss out. And people don't want to miss out. We tend to feel loss aversion, much more deeply than we feel gains. So we tend to really avoid losses, and scarcity taps into that. And then authority, notwithstanding unity, the seventh principle, authority says, when I don't have time to unpack, complex things like what kind of doctor should I choose for my appendix surgery or whatever the case is, we tend to default to experts. Oh, this person went to that medical school. It looks like on health grades, I can pull in social proof. That person's probably good. We tend to default to college professors, people who are, or police officers or things like that, people who are in positions of authority. We tend to assume that they know what they're talking about and we can rely on them. That isn't always the case, but one of the ways to think about all of these principles at work is, how can you apply them in a way that benefits your career? Can you do things, going down the list for other people at work that create some equity, that not only help people say, wow, that person is willing to help out, I like that person, but I'm also willing to do something for that person. That's the reciprocity piece. Can you get some social proof? Can you finish a course or a class that not only enhances the proof that you know how to do something, but also gives you some authority? It shows that you're an expert in a certain area. Do you work on building a reputation that's rooted in commitments that you make carefully and being consistent? Do you drive up the numerator variables in the trust equation and drive down the self-orientation. And then one of the things that's really interesting and sort of paradoxical at work is there's an old adage out there, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. What I mean by that also is saying, making sure that you don't have too much availability at work, right? You want to find somebody that is busy, that is engaged, that is demonstrating that they're valuable. If you're always available to do something and you're never scarce, then people start wondering like, well, what is that person working on that they're always available to do something? You want to think about how to have some element of scarcity in your schedule. Just as an illustration. Now, the last thing to think about is how do you try this stuff out? This stuff works. And the idea behind it is you have to overcome your fears and preconceived notions that politics is bad. It's not a bad thing. Politics is neither good nor bad. It's just a thing. The question is, how do you understand it and how it impacts what you do work-wise and how to get ahead in an organization? So you have to be more comfortable thinking about how do I become comfortable dealing with some things that may seem a bit scary or uncomfortable to me. Practice. There's nothing wrong with practicing the principles of influence and the influence principles as well. You need to make sure you put them to work. Think of specific instances. And if you're interested, feel free to grab the book or contact Laura or myself. We'll be happy to give you some ideas. And then ultimately use these things for good, positive outcomes. You don't have to apply them all to get things that you want done, but use them in a judicious, upstanding, ethical way. That's really, really important. Okay, the principles work, but use them in a way that is beneficial and helpful for yourself and your organization, reflects well upon you as someone that does have good character traits and not anything other than that. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Lori, and we will take questions that people have. We have a few minutes left.
Thank you so much, Ed. This was really fantastic. What a great amount of information, so actionable too. And I love how you summarized, that at the end for everybody. A couple things I wanted to clear up for everybody is, first of all, the recording will be sent to you automatically in addition to the slides from today. So for those of you who are wondering about that. In addition, I have put Ed and Laura's book so that you can, if you want to actually look at that book and get that book, I've put that in the chat for you.
You need to do that. Thank you very much. Happy to have you just come into the webinar today, but thanks.
And then we do have some questions in chat, and certainly feel free to put your next questions in Q&A. So for the first question, Ed, this is around influence and liking. And the question is, how do you build social relationships if you're introverted or if engagement can be, difficult for you?
Yeah, I had the exact same question for somebody yesterday on the webinar. And what I proposed is, I'm introverted. A lot of people are introverted. We tend to see when we look at research that leadership traits tend to be associated with people who are more extroverted. So one of the things you need to do, going back to the very last slide, is if you're introverted, you're going to have to work at it a little bit. So prepare for meetings, get the agenda in advance, think about what you can do and where you can make contributions, push yourself. You can create a script of responses for things that you would say. You have to do a little extra work to try to overcome your introversion. It's not about turning someone who's an introvert into an extrovert. That would never work, and never advocate that. But again, going back to being influential, you're going to have to get more comfortable with speaking up in situations where you might be disinclined to do so. And some of that comes from just practicing. You can practice at home, you can practice with colleagues, you can practice with friends, but you can ask yourself, how am I preparing for these work situations? How do I make sure that I have confidence in myself that when I make a comment or make a point, or I'm willing to say, hey, Lori, can you give me a minute? I'd like to finish the point. You feel like you're building confidence. And I think a lot of times we will find that people take the classes that I've had the good fortune of teaching over the years and say, part of the reason I'm here is to help boost up my own confidence. So you just have to be willing to get out there and do it.
Yeah, those are all really fantastic points, Ed. And I'm sure practicing with somebody that you're comfortable with might be a helpful way to start. That's 2 cents I would add. Another question that came in is about influence again, and it's related to authority. So how do you differentiate deference to positional authority versus deference to matter expertise?
To positional authority versus expertise. Well, I think, it's important to be respectful in every organization. And certainly when we look at people in positions of power, we ought to be deferential to them. I think it's always reasonable. And again, this is probably more of a personal point of view than anything else. If you have a question or you're not sure about something, just ask a question. You're saying, Susan, this, I hear you saying, have we considered this? You don't have to criticize people. And I'm not suggesting that someone is implying that, but there's tools you can use. I'll give you a quick tool for the folks that are still on that I've taught my negotiation class. It's called LCS, Light Concern Suggest. And I'll put it in the chat here. LCS. And I'll explain it to you if you haven't seen it. So for instance, somebody makes a point. Here's what we're going to do. Say, Lori, I really love the way you kicked things off today. I thought you did a nice job really framing up and getting everyone on board and explain to them what we do in the School of Professional Studies. So I'm validating the work that was done. I'm a little concerned that some of the things might have pushed us a little too long. I mean, I don't think it was wrong, but I think that, maybe I was concerned it sort of pushed the clock a little bit. And here's my suggestion. I suggest maybe we think about, taking 1 or 2 slides out. So in presenting a piece of feedback that way, it's not a complimentary sandwich. There's another term for that with giving people feedback. Hey, you're a great person. Here's some terrible feedback. Hey, you're a great person. That's not there's something else that's termed I won't use here on the webinar. It's really about valid. I mean, and most people, when they make a point, have something valid about the point that they're making. Say, I do really like that. I actually do appreciate the point that you made. But I'm not 100% on board with this second part. But ultimately, this last thing, let me just make a few suggestions, as opposed to saying, the way this thing started off was terrible. I have to be honest with you, I would do it because that usually puts the person on the defensive, and it makes someone who's, whether they're an expert or in a position of authority, they're going to be less inclined to take your feedback. I mean, think about a situation where someone came up to you and just gave you a piece of feedback straight away. It might have been negative, that you didn't have a good relationship with. Sometimes it's hard for us to hear that. I don't think you should give them the good, bad, good sandwich, but I also think you're trying to be respectful of, hey, some of the things you did were actually okay, but a couple of things maybe weren't so helpful. You might want to try this. And I do that in my coaching a lot. And I think it helps get the message across more effectively.
Thank you, Ed, so much. And I assume, it might be understood, but just to say it anyway, likely you want to do that in private. If you're giving feedback to somebody, not necessarily in the middle of a meeting or any other kind of forum. Okay, so next question, how to demonstrate competence and talk about your projects around people who have jealous reactions to your skills or projects.
Yeah, so I don't know the situation, so it's totally out of context for me. So I can't say, here's what happened. So I don't think I'm giving you personal points of view, so I want to be careful here. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, here's what I'm working on. Here's some of the things that we achieved. Here's some of the outcomes. If you do it in a way, and again, I don't know how the information is being delivered, if it's done in a way that makes people feel uncomfortable, like you just want to deliver that message in a thoughtful way that doesn't make anyone feel like anything they're doing is necessarily of a lesser degree. However, I would also say, assuming the work is credible, which I assume it is, and the message is given somewhat just, sort of in a plain way, I'm not sure each of us is responsible for other people's reactions in the workplace. If someone feels a sense of jealousy or frustration, I'm not convinced our job is to ensure that they feel good about all the things we're doing. I think some of that stuff, again, it's out of context for me, but it's a workplace. We're trying to get things accomplished for our organization. If someone has a particular challenge with something, they can certainly bring it up. We can discuss it, but I tend not to worry so much about other people's reactions to things, mainly because I can't control those things.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, that's a real challenging situation, but I love the advice you gave there without knowing the context, of course. All right, so we have a couple more questions, and we have time for more questions. So how do you navigate when leadership does not perceive you to be a valued resource and there's no room to show your skill set? So this is a little bit related, perhaps to one of the former questions, but, more about, how do you showcase your skill set when the leadership does not perceive you to be a valued resource. So how do you get the word out? How do you?
Yeah, this is a good question. The Power Book covers off on some of that. Jeff Pfeffer's Power Book. It was, it's got some, there's a chapter in there on that. I would respectfully disagree with the point that you can't demonstrate your skills and capabilities. Every leader I have ever worked with has tons of challenges and difficulties. They're almost always looking for somebody to help them take something off their plate or do a task that they're not interested in. There's always a way to find or demonstrate value. You can create value out of nothing. That's one of the things in Jeff Pfeffer's book. Start a committee. You can start a lunch group. You can, do an after hour. I mean, just brainstorm. There's lots of ways to do things that create value in organizations. Oftentimes it boils down to one's own initiative on that. But I do think there's ways to demonstrate value. And I want to encourage people to go back and think about what are some of the things that need to be done around here, or some ideas that I have, or just good practices from other organizations that I can bring here. Because there's a lot of ways to create value out of nothing, literally out of nothing. That you can do something that all of a sudden turns into something that gives you credibility. This is recency bias. On the last call, I was talking to a gentleman and he said, in our organization, we don't have anybody that does this sort of thing. I thought, well, you could be the person that does that thing. There's nothing stopping you from sort of picking up the mantle and saying, I'm the person that's going to do this thing. Now, that might feel a little uncomfortable at first, and you may not get a perfect amount of traction, but there's almost always a way to create some value in organizations. Now, that may be different than your core job, but I think part of being a good leader is seeing those opportunities or seeing those challenges as opportunities and taking advantage of them.
Excellent. Okay, so time for one more question, Ed, and then we're going to wrap things up. But
sure.
There's two here that are pretty related. So asking a question or asking someone in a more senior role to do something that you need them to do. And a related part of that is I was told once not to use please language when asking somebody to do something that I need help with.
Well, I don't know the context, and I use please when I need to, and please and thank you. Sometimes I'll ask for someone to do a favor, or I'll need their help with something. Again, if you use the principles here are reciprocity. So if you can demonstrate some form of reciprocity, can you do something for them first? Or you can commit to doing something. Hey, look, Lori, if you do this for me, if something comes up that you need help with here in the next couple of months, just let me know. I'll be the first person to help you. So you can leverage these principles, so liking matters. If the person likes you, they're going to be more inclined to do it. You can also leverage reciprocity. These tools and these techniques are available to you. I think part of being effective in organizations is figuring out a way to get things done. Now, whether or not you should say, please, I will leave that to your own. I just don't know if that's good advice or not. I don't know enough to know about it, but if I need something done at work, I'll usually just say, hey, can you help me out with this? I usually say thanks though.
Yeah, thanks. Please and thanks usually are a good way to go, but I understand, as you said, we don't know what the context is in that particular situation, but thank you all so very much for your questions.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
For such fantastic content. I hope everybody's walking away with lots and lots of tips and techniques on how to develop your influence and persuasion skills. Again, I put Ed and Laura's book in the chat for you. I also want to just tee up that our next Lessons in Leadership webinar is going to be Driving Focused Execution, and that's on November 20th at noon. And then following that, we have one on December 11th, which is on the topic of achieving top-tier performance. And we hope you can join us for both of those. We appreciate your participation today. It was a very vibrant discussion in chat and from Ed's perspective. And thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.
Good seeing you. Take care.